So we're ready to get going with our next panel. Once again, welcome to all of you who are from the general public. This is all part of our State Bar of Montana 2024 annual meeting. And our next panel, I think you'll find very interesting, given everything that's going on in the world and in the country. This panel we're presenting in conjunction with the Mansfield Center at the University of Montana. As many of you know, Mike Mansfield was the longest serving majority leader in the history of the United States. He was known for his bipartisanship and his ability to work across the aisle and to have a civil discourse, something that we all might find we could learn from. Senator Mansfield has now the Mansfield Center in his honor. And one of the things they're working on is a democracy initiative to try to encourage civil discourse about important issues. So we're pleased to bring this program to you today in conjunction with the Mansfield Center. And it's my great pleasure to introduce to you the president-elect of the State Bar of Montana, Tony Tease of Billings. Tony.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, they just turned it up. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Tony Tease. I'm president-elect of the State Bar. And our discussion this afternoon is going to concern the lawyer's role in society from rules of conduct to action. As the model rules of conduct for all attorneys know, lawyers play a crucial role in upholding the rule of law and preserving a democratic society. That role includes furthering the public's understanding and confidence in the legal profession and the justice system in an era of declining public trust. Bill Bay, president of the American Bar Association, and Dan Cotter, president of the National Conference of Bar Presidents, are going to join me for what will hopefully be an informative and candid discussion about the role of lawyers in restoring that trust, improving the administration of justice, and protecting the rule of law. So I very much appreciate Bill and Dan joining us this afternoon for this conversation. Let's get started. My first question for both of you is, what do you believe are the most critical responsibilities of lawyers in upholding the principles of democracy? And I'd like to start with Bill.
Well, it's good to be here. It's working. Good. Yeah, good. Thank you. I can barely see you guys. The lights are bright. No, it's good to be here. Yeah, I think let me start with this. I mean, the question is, maybe before we get into that, is why are lawyers the key players here? And I think there's several reasons why lawyers really have a crucial role. Number one, really since the founding of the Republic, lawyers have played a key role almost at everything we do. You look at this. I mean, you look at the number of lawyers who signed the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. Lawyers played a key role. And I think we play a really key role in ensuring that laws are applied equally to all citizens and that government actions are subject to the review that's needed that leads to accountability, transparency, predictability. So that's one really important reason. Number two is that in a real sense, lawyers make justice real. When we represent clients, we make justice real for them. We're their advocate, we're their voice. And when we do public service work, when we represent those that can't afford representation, we really make justice real. And so it's really important for us to play a role here in democracy. And then third, I think, it may be just obvious to you, but lawyers are good listeners. At least I think the best lawyers are good listeners. It's because we listen to clients, we listen to judges, we listen to opposing counsel. You'll learn a lot. And I think it's good for us as we show the power in a democracy, the power of listening and learning from what we listen, because sometimes the best suggestions come from unlikely places. And so I think that's why that's why the why. The second thing, I guess, is it's the right time. It's an election season, okay? It's a good time to focus on what we can do. Obviously, we should vote and encourage family, friends, and colleagues to vote. Sure, that's obvious. Become a poll worker. How many people have been poll workers here? We've got a few. I mean, it's not that mysterious a process. It's okay. It's okay to try it, see what's there. You know, I think it's giving talks in our communities, telling people, writing the local newspapers about the rule of law, the importance of democracy, our elections, volunteer with a local election board. I think we play a role in demystifying the process The people that are busy being court workers and who are poll workers in our justice system, these are our friends. These are our neighbors. We may not know them all, but there are people that are just regular people trying to do their very best. You can also be a pro bono lawyer protecting elected officials. There's an election official legal defense network. I mean, I can give you like 20 acronyms for all these things we can do. But I think it is important to stand up in our casual conversations for what people should do. Are we going to have disinformation? And sometimes it's deliberate disinformation. Sometimes it's just misinformation. People don't know. And I think we have a responsibility to know and to be able to dispel that and say, I hear your concerns, but it's not like that. I've been there. I've seen it. I've been the poll worker. I've done these things. And I think the other thing is there's a modeling piece, I think, for us, which is modeling public dialogue. I really have been harping about words matter. How we speak to each other, how we talk as in our own system is important. And obviously, when you hear threats of violence and people doing things, we got to condemn that. We have to stand up and say not to do that. I mean, I really think, in a sense, what we do in this area matters so much. Obviously, the political discourse is way too divisive. Obviously, people are hostile to people who have differing views. And our election officials and people that are just doing their job have come under attack. We can't permit that. Judges and judicial staff have been highly criticized, face threats of violence. That's not the world we can live in. None of us can be comfortable with that. I mean, I looked at some data here. 25% of people say violence is justified if their candidate's not elected. Come on. Another poll, 52% of young adults have little to no trust in government institutions. 38% of Americans support authoritarianism as a response to the direction of democracy. That should really trouble everybody. 38%. 38%.
Yeah.
And we got to be troubled by that. So, I mean, I think what happens is too many of us, myself included, have taken for granted that, our democracy, our rule of law, our civic norms, our freedoms, we've just taken them for granted. It's what it's always been since I grew up.
Right.
And I think we've got some hard work to do to make sure that we preserve the best of what we have. Can it be improved? Of course it can be improved. That's not the issue. And I think one of the ways, if you don't know what you want, what to do, I think one of the first things is for each other. Let's learn to disagree better. Okay, we're not always going to agree on things, but there's never a place to demonize judges and the other side when we don't get decisions we want. I lose lots of cases. I try cases. I lose. Sometimes I'm frustrated with the judge. Sometimes I'm frustrated with the process. I think the jury's got it wrong. Okay. But I mean, I got to remember to respect and say, no, people are trying to do their best. I've lost. I'm very disappointed. And I think part of that is on our own senses. How can we disagree better? And I think change starts with each of us. I don't know. And I'm sorry to go too long-winded, but I mean, this is.
And one question for you. We're going to go to Dan on the same question, but you've just shared a lot of good ideas with us on how lawyers can get involved in this specific issue. Does the ABA have a resource or a checklist where people can go?
We've got lots of,
Okay.
I got some notes in there. We have a lot of.
All right.
things
Do you want to tell us about that now? Then we'll go to Dan. on this one?
Go to Dan and come back.
All right. Deal.
So here's another stat that is astounding. It's coming out in the World Justice Project report on Monday. 13% of Americans, regardless of political affiliation, say that they don't have to follow laws of a party for which they have not voted. Think about that, 13% of Americans across the board. We're a nation of laws. We talk about the rule of law. It's sad to me in many respects that the rule of law has become a bipartisan issue. When we were growing up and things, the rule of law meant something, and we as lawyers take an oath to uphold that. We're officers of the court when we appear in court. And as Bill mentioned, almost half of the signers of the Declaration were lawyers. 2/3 of the signatories to the Constitution were lawyers. We've always been the people that have been gone to when challenges and issues arise. And I think one of the things that we can do to protect our democracy is we have knowledge. We know what these things mean. As Bill said, to reduce the temperature, we need to have dialogues. We don't. Social media in many ways has done that. The model of Congress has done that since the 80s. We have a very hyper-partisan Capitol Hill. Unfortunately, that doesn't get things done. It just really wants to bicker and get one victory over another party for political reasons. Again, we as lawyers, we are looked at in our communities, in the towns you represent in Montana, in Chicago, and St. Louis, where Bill is, wherever we're at. Again, we're looked at to resolve issues, to tell people what things are. And I think that a couple of things can happen. One is, I think that we can do a better job of educating the public on civics and civility and things that go into that. We at the Chicago Bar, we have programs that go into classrooms and teach civics to students. I teach civics all the time to people. When you see the statistics, it's again astounding. It's not just the Supreme Court, but it's most people can't name a Supreme Court justice. They can't name the three bodies of government. And so I think we as lawyers if we're going to keep this republic, we need to educate and help to guide it so that we are, in fact, the nation that, 250 years from now is still in existence and is still functioning.
Thank you, Dan. Would you like to go to ABA resources? or
Sure.
Okay.
No, I mean, it's quite a few things. Number one, you talked about going into classes, civics, public education, or division of public education. You can Google them. It's lots of resources where you can go in just in your community. I mean, I know we all dream of doing great things that affect the whole world, but what we do in these small ways really matters. And I think that's what we'll try to provide resources to make it easy. Come in and talk civics, talk the basic things you know. So that's one way. We have a standing committee on fair elections, which is a bipartisan group talking about what are the standards for fair elections. You guys have concerns about what's fair. You want some resources. Maybe you feel like it isn't. You want to get resources. That's where we have it. And then we've created last year a task force on American democracy. It was the last ABA president's major initiative, and we had bipartisan people went and had listening sessions, but then actual sessions around many states talk about what we can do. And some of these things we're talking about, but it again reflects that whether you can do something great, whether you can do something small, whether you have 10 minutes, whether you have 2 hours, whether you want to be a micro volunteer, there's something you can do. And there's something we all have to do.
Boy, the two of you have just now, in your answer to just one question, touched on a whole number of additional topics. So let's drill down on some of those specific topics now. Let's focus on the judiciary. And I'd like to turn to Dan, since that was the topic of your book. In what ways can lawyers support and protect the independence of the judiciary, and why is this important for democracy?
So I sign every one of my books when I sign it. An independent judiciary is essential to a free nation. And I tell the story when I was Chicago Bar president. One of my predecessor presidents had written an editorial in the Chicago Tribune attacking one of the Illinois Supreme Court justices that he was bought and paid for by an insurance company. And we were at the mid-year dinner with the ISBA and the Illinois State Bar and the Chicago Bar. And I was sitting at the table with the Chief Justice at the time, who was the subject of the editorial. And I think when I went up to speak, I think he was concerned that I would kind of support the Chicago Bar prior president. And when I got up there, I think he was very relieved, and he wrote me a note post, because I talked about that. I talked about that we can't attack the justices and impugn them for improprieties without the evidence. And we can't be attacking, like Bill said, are there decisions that are against what we think should have been done? Are there appellate courts? Are there juries? Are there arbitrators? Are there, you named the body that have come up with decisions that we find just astounding and just wrong? Sure. And we can attack the logic, we can attack various aspects of it, but we should not be attacking the judiciary. We should not be putting them and their staffs in harm's way. In Chicago, about 30 years ago now, one of the judges at the Northern District of Illinois, one of her prior defendants that was charged in her courtroom, went to the home seeking to kill her, and instead they killed her husband and her son. She came home to find them shot and murdered in her home. And we've had the attacks on Justice Kavanaugh, the person that was near his house. There was a thing that happened with Justice Sotomayor where somebody went up to one of the marshals, knocked on the window, and that person was shot. They had a gun. Don't know if they were looking for Justice Sotomayor. But we as lawyers, again, we have to educate the public that you can't have that 13% that you're not going to follow rules. You can't have that violence is okay if something goes wrong. That's not the way that again, the judiciary is out there. The vast majority are doing the job that they've been elected or appointed to do. And we have to protect them. And we have to find ways as well, I think, to make sure that they've got the resources and defense at all levels so that they're not being attacked. And we can't, again, I think in many states and in Illinois, for example, that justice ended up losing his election next time. There was a justice out of Rock Island, who's a good friend of mine, Thomas Kilbride. He lost an election for, again, various things that were not true. But we need to, as lawyers, again, I think, be objective about the process. And again, we may have differences on judicial philosophy or other things of justices and judges at any level. But we can't let this bipartisanship and these personal attacks take place. Because if we do, then the system, I think, becomes a mockery of itself. And then we get these stats like we do every year where there's declining credibility of this Supreme Court of the United States. It goes down every year. It's at the lowest it's been, a little above Congress, but still very low. We as a society, if we are going to have a system of justice, I think we need to, again, think through those things. And as Bill said, we can disagree with things without, again, making it personal. You know, there's a lot of talk. Bill and I were talking yesterday. Senator Schumer is making comments about the justices are bought and paid for. You know, and again, we talked about it at lunch. Are there issues with and optics of people receiving millions of dollars that's unreported? Probably a violation of the Financial Disclosure Act, which is a whole other subject. But you can't just make the connection and connect the dots and say, well, he's doing this, so obviously he's bought and paid for by somebody, because there's not evidence of that. His judicial philosophy is what it is. He views the Constitution how he does. And so we have to get away from this kind of personal attacks and this social media engagement of just using rhetoric that is, to me, inflammatory and potentially dangerous.
Agreed. Bill, thoughts on judicial independence?
No, I mean, the consequences, the violence we're seeing. I mean, and so that's why, you know, there's the federal, we're doing better, but in states, we have to give judges and court personnel more security. That's a front burner issue in the states. And it's important. It's a consequence of what's happened is that we become kind of used to everybody taking a shot every day. That's the world we live in. We wouldn't have tolerated some of the things that have been said, you know, 20 or 30 years ago. We'd have been outraged. And you know, I struggle with, you know, how often do we want to speak? Well, I can't speak every 22 minutes on this and issue a statement. But I mean, I issued a statement a few days ago, and it's coming from all sides. You know, when the response to decisions of a court is to accuse the judiciary of undermining democracy, our electoral system, being fascist, trying to steal an election, being a sham, a travesty, being corrupt, conducting judicial coups, the credibility of our court suffers. And these are direct quotes. It happened in like 4 days from 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. Okay, this is a bipartisan, unfortunately, issue. And so, you know, words really matter. We cannot live in a world where we just say, hey, this is going to be normal. And I know it puts us in tough decisions. I mean, it's easy to defend a court when there's a decision we like, but it's much tougher. It's much tougher to defend a court when the decisions we don't like. And it's criticism is fair game. Criticism of decisions fair game. But when there's ad hominem attacks on the integrity, that's a tough spot. But we have an obligation to be there because we're part of a profession.
That's right. And it's going to be harder to recruit good, competent, honest people to those positions if their lives are in danger. Okay, let's turn to the topic of legal education, since we have many law students in the audience and members of the U of M Law School faculty and administration. Let's start with Dan on this one. How can legal education better prepare future lawyers to engage with and contribute to democratic values and processes?
You know, again, I think it's part of the education. I think that we're going through kind of a revolution, I would say, in terms of the review of legal education in the United States, the bar, the next gen bar, what's accreditation. There's jurisdictions now that you don't have to take the bar exam. We may go back to positions where you don't have to actually go to law school. You know, before the 1900s, somewhere along the line, there were several people that didn't go to law school. Many even more recent. I think Robert Jackson was the last person that didn't graduate from law school that sat on the Supreme Court of the United States. So that was in the 1950s, believe it or not. So I think again, I think that there should be teaching about some of these civic engagement, some more focus on kind of those types of things. And again, it could be just thinking aloud now, but you know, we have moot court, we have negotiation competitions, we have mock trials. Why not have go back to some of the debating types of things that many law students in undergraduate and high school did, United Nations types of things, where you have issues, and again, learn to be civil in discourse. I sat in part of the morning session today with the newer lawyers at the tables, and we talked about some of these things and about how establishing good relationships with the other parties, with court clerks, with judges, et cetera, is part of the process. But I don't think any of that's ever taught in law school. I used to teach accounting for lawyers, which I think is a good course. But I think some of these courses can be, you can design things so that there can be more focus on, again, civics, civility, some of these programs that Bill's talking about, the public education. Oftentimes, some of the programs that we do in Chicago, we get students from the law schools to come along and participate. And again, I think that a kind of exposure to how you can do things in a manner that's not escalated in terms of temperature, that's not always, again, this social media driven, you know, hide behind the keyboard. We used to call those people pigskin bicep people, right? Because you get these tough lawyers and stuff because they got a law degree on their back wall, right? And, you know, I was a former power lifter, so physically I could probably beat the heck out of most people on the other side, but they're equal because they could talk words and do stuff that's just, again, doesn't advance democracy, doesn't advance the protection of rule of law. And so I think there's some things like that that can be done at the law school level. The one thing I had lunch yesterday with the dean of the Montana Law School, and I think that's interesting, is that the design of the law school is different than I've heard before, where they're law firms and they have a 2L or a 3L. I think those, again, are some of the cohorts that can advance some of these things, and maybe that could be part of the discussion of orientation and throughout the semester and throughout the 3 years of law school, so that, again, these students come out as educated people that can educate the rest of the public about how you can have civilized discussion and protect our democracy.
Bill.
Well, I love your law school. I love the dean. I got off the plane yesterday, and the second stop we made was at the Big Dipper to have ice cream with her. So
Yeah.
I was very much,
Oh, yeah.
very much there. But you know what? I talked to law students today at noon over at the law school. I mean, it's one of the things we talked about. Obviously, you want to get the best education. You want to learn the law. You can't be a good lawyer if all the time you got the law wrong. Okay, but this is a relationship business. Law is a relationship business, and it's relationships with clients, relationship with judges, court personnel, other counsel is so critical. And those are the things we have to, I think, really teach people. The people in your law school class, you know, are going to become your friends, are going to become people. They will be there when you least expect it. And it's a choice you made. It's a connection we have, whether you graduated last year, whether you graduated 40 years ago, we have a connection. And I think the other thing is, and maybe this is old fashioned again, it's, you know, it's important sometimes to teach grace. You know, it's, I've learned the power of saying, I'm sorry, not to repeat the mistake again, but to say, no, I got to do better. Sometimes I have to tell opposing counsel, yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't right here. And so people show me grace on my less than best day. We should show other people grace. I mean, I was quite struck. I told the law school class, Brian Stevenson, who's a big death penalty guy who I just think the world of, says, it's hard to judge people for the worst thing they did in their life. And he's talking about death penalty. So it's tough. We have to be careful not to. And then I think reputation matters. We're talking to law students. You have to have integrity, be honesty, and grace and being I'm sorry is important about that, because reputation matters. And I don't care how big a state or how small a state or city, people know you by the kind of person you are. I was encouraged. I wanted to thank 120 deans back in June of our 200 ABA approved law schools signed a letter committing to the critical role of lawyers in sustaining our constitutional democracy. So they're on board. The law deans affirmed that training for the next generation of lawyers should include first teaching students to uphold the highest standards of professionalism, which include the duty to support our constitutional democracy and to further the public's understanding of and confidence in the rule of law and the justice system. That's a quote right out of the Model Rules of Professional Conduct. Then they coveted that they were going to offer courses, workshops, and events that engage with the rule of law and democracy, teach students how to disagree respectfully, and to engage across partisan divides, and then to encourage students to support the Constitution through clinical work, public ed, and advocacy. So they're on board. We need to be on board. I mean, I love this law school here because it incorporates so many practical things that the practicing lawyers know. It's not just up here in the academic world solely. It's very practical. So those are the kind of things that are being done already, both here in this law school and in law schools around the country.
That's excellent. I'm glad you brought up the topic of that letter. That's really good to know. And Dan, you alluded to the evolution of the profession, which leads me to AI. I'm going to ask an AI-related question. And we here in the State Bar of Montana have formed a task force that's going to be examining the future of the legal profession. AI will probably become one of the topics we explore. But my question here is about technology and ethics. We'll start with Dan. How are advancements in technology impacting legal practice, and what ethical considerations arise from these changes?
Sure. So one of the things that I think we talk a lot about at NCBP, we've had artificial intelligence at each of our last 4 or 5 meetings. And if you're in leadership, and Tony, I hope you'll start coming to them. But we talk about the fact that artificial intelligence is not necessarily new to our profession. And I always talk about this when I teach. I teach ethics for lawyers and the model rules of professional conduct, especially with technology. Rule 1.8, I don't know if you've adopted the comment to 8, that talks about knowing the risk and benefits of technology. Some states like Florida, South Carolina, and a few others have added a CLE hour to the mandatory CLE that has to be completed every so many years. But the reason I say it's not necessarily new is if you jump back to electronic document research and review, back when relativity was fairly new, back in the 1990s, late 1990s, early 2000s, people thought that was the end of law. I remember lawyers, partners at law firms of any size would tell their associates to go through the boxes anyway, or to look at the stuff because it wasn't necessarily true. And the civil code of civil procedure didn't change until about 2006, I believe it was, when it talked about electronic documents. So there was that. My first career was in accounting. And so in 1988, I graduated from Monmouth College. The only time I saw Lotus 123, which was the predecessor or competitor and much better than Excel, was on an overhead in a science building the last day of my senior year in my accounting class. And I become an expert in it. And the same thing, I went to work. I'm at CNA Financial. I'm in investment accounting. We've got 10,000 lines of data. My boss says, how do we know that the formulas are correct in there? Run a 10 key against it. So, and again, the accounting world lasted. So I think the reality is that artificial intelligence is here to stay. I think that it's not going to replace us. I don't think it can. I think for some of the reasons we were just talking about, the human element, the judgment and those types of things. Will it get better and better? Sure. But if you ask some things of ChatGPT, even Model 4, it gives you garbage answers, right? I've asked before, name Illinois Supreme Court justices or something like that, and or Supreme Court of the United States justices, and some of the people on there, I have no idea why they answer in that way, even when you correct it. So I think that it's true that I think artificial intelligence is a tool that can assist us in being better. I think that the ethical rules are similar to any other thing. So when we file briefs with courts, I don't think we need special rules from district courts or from appellate courts about testifying that stuff is true and believable. Why? Because if you use a first-year associate, if you have partners and colleagues that are impaired mentally or intoxicated or under the influence, right? They're not right. You have a responsibility before you file a brief with any body to verify that that stuff's true. So these hallucinations and other things and then the lawyers always say, well, I relied upon, that's a bad lawyer, right? Those are people that should not be either practicing or need some remedial training. They need to go back to law school and learn about what it means to actually cite the stuff and for the propositions. And we've all probably been in the court, by the way, where I remember early in my career, neither party cited some case in Illinois. It was on other insurance provisions, which is a mess of a law in Illinois. Neither one of us cited to a case. The judge pulled the book off the spindle and asked us about it. And we had to explain why we didn't use that. So again, I think some of these things, supervision, the supervision laws, rules of Section 5, competency, confidentiality, all these things exist in the current world, whether we're using paper, using computers, we're using emails. And so I think that it's here. I think that, you know, there's challenges. Again, I don't think that any lawyers should be relying solely upon artificial intelligence and not doing the work to make things better. I think that what artificial, and I use it some, but not a lot. I use it for research or to start stuff. But I think what one of my colleagues in Chicago talked about once was that he asked it something. He was supposed to get 15 minutes. He's a plaintiff's lawyer, been a plaintiff's lawyer for many years. And he said it was like an 8th grade book report, that if he gave it, it was right. It was good stuff. Grammar was right. But if he gave that to his colleagues, he would have been laughed out of the room because these were all people that were his peers. And so he said it was a good start. And so I think that we need to weigh the risk and benefits of the technology, but I don't think it's going away. It's going to get better, but again, I don't think it'll replace us. And then the final thing I'll say is we need to be careful because I was at I'm on the ABA Cyber Task Force. They had someone from the FBI on recently, and he told a story of a situation where a guy was on a Zoom call with 4 people. They appeared to be real people. And he transferred money and an investment to each of these people. And it was a deep fake. It was a deep fake video, but he was live on Zoom. These people were interacting with him and he transferred the money and it was a cyber scam. It was a phishing attempt and $1 million or $2 million was lost.
Bill, thoughts on this issue?
No, I may agree with Dan. I mean, we can all talk about the parade of horribles about AI, but it's already here. I mean, not the horribles, but we're already using it in certain programs. I mean, I got picked up an Uber Tuesday morning from Chicago, and you know the guy didn't show up for 25 minutes, so I canceled and it charged me a fee. And then they said, well, this isn't you can make a complaint through our AI program. Well, I mean, I hated it. Okay, it was 40 minutes. I hated it. I did get my feedback, but it's going to be here. It can be misused and can be used well. The key thing is lawyers have got to be part of the solution, got to be at the table talking about. It's why it's great that the State Bar has the task force. At the ABA, we created one a year ago, and it's looking at 7 areas. We've published a lot of materials. What should we be looking at? We're going to have to change some ethical rules. Sure, we're going to have to change those. Change is everything. I mean, change is the biggest challenge of our time. And so there's going to be changes there. But I mean, we have to be engaged. When this is something each of us is going to say, I got to know more about this. Sometimes I said, gee, I really don't want to know about this, but I mean, I'm going to have to, okay? We're going to have to get involved. This is why I think be involved with the State Bar Commission, ask questions, talk about what's here, engage with what's going on at the ABA, so that not that we can be in charge of AI, but that we bring a certain judgment, which I think is very important for our profession.
And law students, if you're out there, I don't know how many law students are out there, think about the fact that you can help design and provide some prompting and some educational leadership in this, because again, like I said, with my accounting days, I learned how to do macros in Lotus 1, 2, 3, and did some pretty sophisticated things that my IT department at CNA Financial was astonished by. You guys are the drivers of it, because again, the outputs will be based on the inputs and based on the design of the programs that we're doing. And who better than law students that are learning the law and learning how to implement the law, the future of our profession, to help design and be the architects of how this actually can be a better product.
Yeah, I mean, laughing, I just came across in my desk some notes from my first interview of an assistant, and the questions were about shorthand and how good you can be. And now, I mean, my God, we can barely find an assistant that knows how to do shorthand. I mean, it's just, the world has changed. It hasn't become better. I mean, worse, it's become better, for God's sakes.
Well, and Dan, I hear you in terms of guardrails and the ability of these folks to participate in, proposed legislation or cases involving the establishment of those guardrails. I think, as usual, Europe is ahead of us in regulating the forefront of technology. But let's turn to an issue that is near and dear to my heart and that I'm going to be commenting on further this evening, and that is the public perception of lawyers. I think that's an important factor in terms of, frankly, strengthening democracy. So my question is, let's start with Bill. How can the legal profession improve its public image and demonstrate its value to democracy?
It was the perception of the professions has been a problem for years. It's not a new problem. It's not an AI problem. It's a problem that's been long before AI, long before shorthand was being done.
That's right.
It's one of the reasons, well, that's one of the reasons why we've really got to spend some time on this. I think we have to remember what we're about, what our profession is about. And I talked a little bit, we make justice real. I think part of it is telling our story to a nation that doesn't understand what we do. Okay, it doesn't understand the importance of representing those that need representation. It doesn't understand the importance of making sure legal services is funded for those who can't afford it. And so I think part of it really is telling our story. You'll hear me much more talk about we need to be the home for if we want to lead the profession and be the voice of the profession, we have to be the home for the profession. And part of being the home, as the ABA, we have the slogan, defending liberty, pursuing justice, but it's making justice real and telling the stories. And each of you has a story you've told. You could identify some client, some circumstance you've talked about. And we need to be sure to tell those stories, which we're not doing a good job about from a profession. And then on the flip side of thing is we have to be leaders in looking at what we do. When we do things that are not right, when we see lawyers not doing the ethical thing, we need to make sure that they're called up short. We've got to regulate ourselves to make sure that we have the public's confidence in what we do. And we just can't say, oh, well, it's Joe or Jane. No, those days are long past. Okay, there's certain standards you have to adhere to, and we can't be bashful about saying lawyers have to adhere to standards.
So follow-up question for you, and then we'll go back to Dan on the public perception. You just mentioned we have to regulate ourselves. How important is the self-regulation of the legal profession to the institution of democracy?
Well, I think it's really critical. I mean, that's why from an ABA perspective, this is one of the most important things that we do. We have a Center for Professional Responsibility. When there are changes to the ethical code, they come after a long sorting process, a long vetting process, and they come to the House of Delegates. The House of Delegates represents 600 people that come from every one of the states. Montana has a number of people that are in their representation, and it comes from every small firms, big firms, affinity bars, all kinds of representation. It's one of the true places where the entire profession can be heard. And so that's where we then debate and talk about the model rules and how they should be changed. And then those typically go to the chief justices. And by and large, they become then enacted in some form. And so that's why I think the process is really important, but it's also the product, okay? We have to
Yes.
continually be there. And so we have to expect all of our members to say, you know, when you see a problem, when something needs to be addressed, we need to address it. We just can't say there's never a time when it's mission accomplished, okay? There's always going to be changes that we have to make because the world is changing, the profession's changing, everything's changing, sometimes too fast. I get it, but we have to be able to change and have ethical rules and standards that meet the moment.
Yep, agreed. Dan, thoughts on this topic?
I agree with what Bill said, and I think part of the effort to increase our perception is we're not very good at promoting what we do and educating the public and being out in the community as much as we maybe should be. So some of the things I've been talking about, you know, I think going to the community, having conversations about what we do. You know, my dad will say, and my family members, and many of you probably have the same experience. He'll tell me, I hate lawyers, but when they need one, who do they turn to, right? They turn to lawyers because again, we do a lot of things for a lot of people. We're the voice of people that can't necessarily speak. I met some folks today that are in legal aid and other things. Last night at dinner, was with the public defender. I mean, these are people, again, we're the people that protect them from the worst things that can happen. And again, I think part of it is going back to the beginning of this discussion is educating on civics, educating on rule of law, and being out there to educate the population to have a better perception. Like I said, I was at CNA Financial in my career. I've been working 36 plus years. More than 20 of those have been in insurance companies. And there's another industry, they do a terrible job of publicity of when they're there, right? When floods happen and 80% or 90% of claims in the flood zones and in hurricane zones get resolved within 24 hours. People pay full limits on property, but there's always the stories, right, of something where it's denied, and those are the stories that the public sees. And again, you look at the statistics on where the nation's at in terms of perception of our political bodies and branches of government, including the Supreme Court. You look at all these, they're low. But I think that we again can do a better job by being out in the community and doing those types of things, going into schools, going into city council meetings, going into various areas, and again, educating people and being a resource so that they understand that we're not just, you know, some people think it's all just, we're just there for the money and it's really just a business that's trying to take money from everybody else involved in the process. This is not the case. So
Yeah, I think for showing up is so important. Okay, showing up. There are times, you know, I go to lots of bar meetings and I think, gee, I just don't want to. I just don't want to. I want to go home tonight. I don't want to go there. And so I end up going, and it always is an important experience. And I think that's true in our community things. You know, going out there. Yeah, I always come home thinking, gee, I met new people. I heard some new story. And that's important for all of us to be out there telling that story.
It's true. Show up. Big
Show
part
up.
of it.
90% of this job. I mean, I travel a bunch and people say, how do you keep track? And I got all these notes. You can tell the difference between Dan and I. He's got the Bears hat. I've got the stinking notes. But it's 90% of this showing up. Okay. And affirming. I mean, it's so important that you're here. I mean, I think our bar associations exist and we do great as a profession when you sacrifice to show up and participate and be part of an AI task force, part of an ethics, part of something making people a better lawyers. I mean, I never like to lead meetings not telling people how much I appreciate the sacrifice. You're going to be president-elect. That takes lots of work. It takes time out of your family, time out of your practice, time out of your hide. But it's so important when we do it. Okay. It makes a difference.
Well, thank you for that shot in the arm. For me and the rest of us who are here, I'd like to turn an international lens on this conversation, okay? The International Bar Association created a task force in 2015 to look at the independence of the legal profession. They came out with a report in 2016. My question for you is, How do the roles and responsibilities of lawyers in democracy differ internationally? And what can we learn from other countries? Either one of you.
You go.
You know, I think, again, I think in the United States, we're probably, for democratic institutions, we probably have more freedom and more ability than in many places. If you look at places like Hungary, if you look at places like Ukraine, Israel, so some other places, there's really been Mexico, I think, with their change of the Supreme Court. There's really been more and more, I think, of a constraint on the independence of not just the judiciary, but lawyers. A group was formed right after 9/11. It's the World City Bar Leaders, and there's a number of cities that participate. And we've had from time to time, like I said, Turkey and Hungary and other places where just tales of absolute horrors of attorneys that were at these meetings that when they went back to their countries were probably going to be arrested and put into prison for defending people in their court systems. And so I think that, you know, the World Justice Project, as I mentioned before, I'm not going to steal this show or lightning on them, and they really just sent me their US piece, but they give a scorecard, and at the ABA meetings, we meet bills at those meetings. A lot of people at these meetings, and I do a scorecard of different countries. And, you know, the US is what, 13th or 15th, something like that, Bill? We're not at the top, we're not at the bottom out of the 100 and something countries. But it's really pretty stark when you look at how lawyers and the judicial system operates in some democracies around the world compared to here. Justice Breyer wrote a book about international law when he was on the Supreme Court. That's a pretty good read about that. And at one time when he was on the court, a lot of the justices talked about the fact they didn't look at international law. But then if you look at Dobbs, you look at some other cases, what they do, and a lot of these gun cases, other cases, they look at international law because there's no direct on point case. And so, like I said, I think that internationally it's perceived a little bit differently maybe. And I still think we've got a pretty strong system here, but we've got work to do.
Bill?
Yeah, I mean, it is quite, I've made a couple of trips overseas, and it's quite amazing to hear the stories from Polish judges who talk about the risk. I'm going from here to Mexico City to meet with the International Bar Association, and there, as Dan said, there's a real issue you've read about in the media about the judges and where they're going to be elected and how that's going to happen, and that's become some violent pieces to that. This is not great. It's one of the reasons why the ABA started a rule of law initiative after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was precisely because America's lawyers and its profession and its judiciary were looked upon as a beacon of democratic ideals. And so we now have rule of law initiatives in 60 countries around the world. And so we help train lawyers and judges on how to do their job better. There's differences in these systems, but the thing that really strikes me is that we tend to be so introspective. We see all of the faults in our profession, faults in our lawyers, faults in our system. They're real. I get that. Okay. But overseas, we're considered the gold standard. They see the positive. We see all the shortcomings. Now, I'm not going to say we don't need to correct the shortcomings. We do. But I think it's important to remember what we have and that it's worth preserving as a democratic system and judicial system. And you really get the sense when you go to some other country and interact with the judges. I mean, the opening of the legal year is in London, October 1. They'll be the president of every major bar association in the world. And they come and it's fascinating. And they want to hear what's going on. They're concerned with what's happening here in the US, and they're very interested. And so that gives a whole different perspective. I never thought about it. I mean, I'm living in St. Louis, flyover country, for God's sakes. I love my town, but I mean, it was a different perspective, and it sometimes it's always, I'm always looking about something maybe I can whine about. Okay. And I'm the worst at this. Okay. Cause I might complain about it, but it's really, really important to see the world differently, because when you talk to these people, you thought, oh my gosh, they're really facing major issues. they're really facing major issues. Thank goodness we're not there. Do we have concerns? Yes, that's why we're talking about democracy here today. But that's just something to keep in mind as we approach things.
Well, and as a corollary to that, then, we have been through times of crisis. We may be facing times of crisis in the not so distant future. So my question here is, in times of political or social crisis, what role should lawyers play in ensuring that democratic principles are upheld? And you alluded to this earlier in terms of poll worker and things like that, but would like to hear additional thoughts on that from you, Bill, first.
Well, I think it starts with what can we do? What can you do individually? What can each of you do today as you go out here? Okay. We can create all the task forces we want. The ABA has, Montana has, the NCBP, National Conference of Bar Presidents has. Dan could tell us all the states. The question is, what are we going to do individually? What are we going to do in the next 60 days? And I'm not suggesting we should go out and organize a protest to do this and do that. That may be appropriate some places, but it's a question of dealing with your neighbor. Okay. It's a question of remembering how important it is and how thankful we are the system we have. Are there things that can be done better? Yes. Can we correcting misinformation? I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it's I don't know. It's if I've almost come to believe, like, if the internet said that, I mean, if Twitter said the sun rose in the east, I would still go check. Okay. I mean, it's just how it is. And but I do think it's so much we can say all we want, but individually, each of you and us have to decide what can we do today to diffuse these situations. And some of it's because those small things in the world matter. And I know that's not a satisfactory solution to people who are on all the sides that want great things done, but sometimes it's these small things that are most important.
I agree. We just had a Democratic convention in Chicago, and there was concerns that it would be like 1968. And so one of the things that the Chicago Bar and the Illinois State Bar did was training for people to be ready for mass arrest. Thankfully, it didn't happen. There wasn't a lot of violence or broken windows or anything else. But things like that, I think, can be done. Again, I think it's correcting misinformation. If we're on social media platforms, not engaging in kind of any conspiracy theory on either side, and telling the facts. And again, educating the people. Sunlight's the best disinfectant, right? That's the old statement. I think that getting the word out there, providing people with tools so that they know what's coming up for the elections itself, and again, trying to reduce the temperature so that we don't have these types of situations. I think that, again, going out to the community and educating them about that this is in fact, the elections are not illegitimate on either side, that 13% that believe they can not follow laws or cases that come out of courts or whatever. I think those are important things. There's an individual that was recognized by the prior president of the ABA as an unsung hero of democracy. His name is Bill Cressy, and he's formed a nonprofit. He's a fraud examiner and a forensic accountant. That's going to be a nonprofit that's going to set up, and it won't be ready for this election cycle, I don't think, but he's setting up examiners and auditors of elections to, again, show that these are in fact true numbers. And he's a Republican in Chicago. He's the only member of the Board of Elections that was Republican in Chicago, a very Democratic city. But this is a bipartisan issue. He's got former senators, both Republicans and Democrats. And again, it's things like that we can go out and do to, again, kind of hopefully diffuse any of the potential turmoil that's ahead. And we have faced it. We've faced it repeatedly throughout our history. Wasn't just that in the 1770s or the 1860s when Civil War, or the 1950s and civil rights. There's all kinds of times in our history, in the Vietnam War, and there's all kinds of things throughout our history where there was turmoil and we came out of it. But again, I think we need to do whatever we can as lawyers, as kind of the voices of the citizens to diffuse some of this misinformation and some of the temperature that's going to increase over the next 7 weeks or 8 weeks, whatever we got
Right.
left.
And some of the thing is using our lawyer skills, it's investigate the facts. Don't overreact. I mean, everybody wants, it's CNN, it's every 8 minutes, there's a crisis. I mean, I got breaking, not crisis, a breaking news. And I get that. And it's always couches, you'll see, and this is the second worst, this is the worst this is the worst this. I think as lawyers, we're trained to, we hear the facts and say, all right, let me check this out. Let's don't overreact. Let's see what we have. Let's see what's here. And because what the information lots of times we get, they cause us. I mean, I'll overreact. Like, my God, I can't believe they did this. I can't believe they did that. And then I find out, no, that's not so. And so you have to catch ourselves sometimes on
That's
this.
true. Apply our analytical skills. I think we have time for 2 more questions. Let's talk about the role of lawyers as advocates. I'm going to start with Dan on this one, and then we're going to start with Bill on the very last question. So Dan, my question here is, how should lawyers navigate the tension between advocating for their clients and maintaining a commitment to impartiality and the rule of law?
Well, again, we're unlike professional accountants. Accountants, if you read their model rules, they serve the public. They're not serving a client necessarily. Now that's, again, you can go back to the Enron days and Arthur Andersen or anything. That's kind of a myth, but that's the reality. They're giving assurances to the public that the financials are relied upon. Our model rules of professional conduct say that we should zealously represent. But again, it's that talking about hallucinations and talking about all the misinformation and stuff again. We as officers of the court, we as members of the bar, we take oaths that, again, we're going to zealously represent our clients, but there's duties built into the model rules of professional conduct. If we have know of case law or facts that are adverse to our opponent, we as officers of the court are supposed to tell the judge and advise, right? That's part of the model rules of professional conduct. So we can we can zealously represent, and again, we want the best results for our clients, whether that we're government employees, we're in-house, we're plaintiffs, lawyers, defense, whatever we're doing, we want the best results. But we can be not necessarily impartial, but we could be objective, zealous advocates, so that again, like Bill said, taking the time to investigate and making sure that our clients are telling us the full facts. And again, we had a good conversation at the table I was at this morning about how oftentimes our clients tell us partial information or not the full facts. And then sometimes you get from the opposing counsel kind of what they understand. And I'll give you one example and then I'll let Bill speak. I'm an arbitrator for the AAA, and someone had a lawsuit against Amazon. And the Thursday before it was supposed to go to trial, the following Monday, the claimant's counsel said that he had been exposed to information that was not previously available to him from his client, and that he chatted with his client, and based on the evidence that was submitted by Amazon, that he was withdrawing the case with prejudice and closing the case, right? So again, he's zealously advocating, but he's also not threading the line. He's not going and doing something that is based on false information. He's not wasting anybody's time, and did the right thing there. And it probably was painful, right? Because he's not going to get paid for that. His client's probably upset. That's how I think we can do things.
And that kind of conduct supports public perception of our judicial system and our profession.
And
Bill.
people remember that.
Yeah.
Okay. You remember that.
I remember that.
You'd stand that lawyer stands in good stead because they were, I think you got to investigate the facts, find out what's there. I mean, litigation strategy, I'm always looking, going to court, convince the judge and jury that we have the high moral ground of the case. Okay. And sometimes that means, hey, this is a disputed fact. We think this is the way it is. Or sometimes it's saying, Judge, I think the law should be here. Okay. And we're very upfront about it. You got to be upfront about these kind of things. But I don't mind being an advocate. I think that's in the greatest tradition of our profession, be an advocate. But to be an effective one and to be an honest one, you have to know what the facts are and be right up front. Judge, this is a disputed fact. These 3 facts, these are the critical 3 things. They're all disputed, or 2 aren't, but this one is. This is where you're going to have to focus on. And I think people appreciate that. And that's what you expect in your lawyers.
All right, Bill, this one's going to be for you. Our last question about the future. What do you see as the biggest future challenges for lawyers in maintaining their role as guardians of democracy? And how can the profession prepare for these challenges? Very open-ended question.
Well, I said it before, the biggest challenge for us is always the challenge of change. I mean, it's just so, it comes at us so much. How can we preserve the best of what we have as a profession and yet adapt it to meet the demands of a world that's changing incredibly rapidly? And it's far different than it was 25 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago. The ABA people will say, gee, everybody should do like it was when I was 25. And I laughed and I said, keep telling them. It's not working, but you can keep telling them, okay? Because a new generation of lawyers don't know our profession, don't know our associations like we do. We can't keep talking louder. We can't keep just talking more. It's not working. We have to convince lawyers, especially coming right out of law school, why the profession is important, why our bar associations are important, why it's not just a matter of being a member, but being involved. Not that they don't have to be, they don't not going to be president-elect, but to be involved in some way. And it's what's in it for me. That's the questions people are asking. What's in it for me? Why should I do this? What's the value? And I think that's where it's really important. I mean, do I know what's ahead in the future? No, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in the election. I don't know what's going to unfold. I don't know what new thing will happen to us tomorrow, or that we'll wake up and find some story I don't anticipate knowing about. But I do know these things. I mean, I know, number one, what we stand for as a profession, Montana State Bar, the ABA, the many state and local bars. I know what we stand for, and I know what we do. Okay, I really know what we do every day to make lawyers better, to advocate for the things we believe in, to have the networking, to do all the things that matter, to provide legal services for the underserved. I know what we do. And I think the third thing was really important. I know who's there with me. Okay, I know the character of people. I mean, I know a number of Montana lawyers. This is my first visit. And I'm glad to be in the trenches with you. Okay, I'm glad to be in the trenches with you. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think we're more than ready for whatever may happen.
Dan.
You know, I think the biggest challenge to the future of the profession is that if you look at the age demographics and who belongs to bars and stuff, it's on the older end. And I think if you're not aware, there's a cliff right now with the high school graduates that are going on to college just by demographics, because those people that would be a college age, that was the 2008 financial collapse in the country and a recession. And so those people had less kids, and there were less kids from the baby boomers. Each generation's having less kids on average. And so that's one, because there's less people to go to college. A lot of white males in the country. The stats are pretty astonishing right now, but a lot of white males are not going to colleges because of the perception that it's woke institutions, that it's not valuable, that you don't need it. An astonishing thing is 33% of the high school graduates this year that are male, the stat I saw, I don't know if it was Illinois only, but did not go to college, and about 20% of them are unemployed. So think about that. They're not getting good jobs. So that's one risk, I think. I think we as senior lawyers, I think we owe it to pay it forward and pay it back. Each of us has the ability to mentor and bring along people. When I started in the profession, at lunch, I think it was mentioned, I'm getting an award in a couple of weeks, the Justice John Paul Stevens Award. And one of the people that I thanked in my 2-minute video was the first partner that I worked for at Lord Bissell and Brooke in Chicago. He taught me integrity. He taught me how to do things. He brought me along first day there. He brought me to court to watch a case. He went back and told me after lunch to go back. Brought me to opportunities to do depositions, to do and witness things, and that advanced my career. And when I went in-house at CNA Financial, both as a paralegal before I graduated, and when I graduated, there was a guy there, the number 2 person in the law department, same thing. He brought me to meetings. He defended me when somebody would ask about something that happened. He would say that, look, he's not some flunky lawyer in this group. He's one of my people. If I put him on the case, he's your answer. Don't come to me to ask questions. I think we all owe that to those coming behind us, to teach them the tools, to get them involved in bar associations. I know this is a unified bar and it's mandatory, but in many cases, there are local and community bars as well. We need to get people, even if they're members, to participate. And again, to show, to improve their perception. And so that's my call to action for all of you, is to be mentors and advisors and bring the profession along so that it continues to be the strong profession that we found it in when we all came aboard.
Well, I'd like to thank Dan and Bill. Before we give them a round of applause, just a shout out to all the law students who are here. I think a lot of you are in the balcony. Welcome to the profession. It is a fabulous one. And would you join me in a round of applause for Bill and Dan, please? Thank you.